I'm Michael Hingson. I wrote a book called Thunderdog, the story of a blind man, a guide dog, and the triumph of trust at ground zero. This is not the guide dog. Roselle, the dog that was with me in the World Trade Center, passed away in 2011. But this is Africa, who is her replacement, who's about to be embarrassed. Come here, Africa. Come on, up here. Come on up here. Come on up here. Come on. There. All right. So Africa likes to say hello, and I get free kisses this way, so we do it. I understand do we have any guide dogs in the room? No blind people in the room? All right, we're going to pick on Aaron. Scary, huh? I was outside listening. We're going to talk about emergency preparedness. I know that people want to hear the 9/11 story, but I want to talk about emergency preparedness a little bit. Because emergency preparedness and safety is something that all of us should be aware of and address all the time. And the reality is that when we talk about preparing for emergencies and dealing with persons who have a disability, it is something that requires us to do the same things that any of you with eyesight will do, except we may do some of them in a different way. So I said I was going to pick on Aaron. So Aaron, a few moments ago, said that if there's a fire, we need to evacuate the building, we're going to do it through that door over there. Tell me what the problem is with that. You know, that door, when you're dealing with a person who happens to be blind, just isn't going to work. Now, I don't really mean to pick on Aaron, and I know that it's a habit that comes from the fact that most people just deal with eyesight, and you do everything by what you see. And so it's easy to say that door and point, but the fact is that in a society that is growing and becoming more aware that there are more people in the world than those that just use eyesight, that door doesn't work anymore. Now, let me tell you how I generally operate, and I'll tell you some stories. There are some great stories. So 9/11 happened. We all know that. We know why it happened. We know what it was all about. Although I cannot to this day conceive that anyone would choose to do the things that those people did. But 9/11 occurred nevertheless. When I first went to New York to work, it was for a different company. It was in 1996. I opened an office for this company on the 23rd floor of Tower 2. One of the things that I kept in mind was that 3 years before, there had been a bombing in Oklahoma, in the World Trade Center, and there had been no loss of life, but nevertheless, it was an emergency situation. And so I made it a point to do a couple of things. One, being the leader of the office, it was important for me to know how to travel around the World Trade Center and how to travel around New York and do the things that any office leader, manager would have to do. That is, if I'm back negotiating contracts, I needed to be able to negotiate from a position of strength. And I believe that happening to be blind gave me a unique position of strength. So if, for example, people came to my office and we were going to talk about one thing or another and negotiate prices or whatever we needed to do, because I sold computer products of a variety of different kinds, I needed to know where the restaurants were so that if we all went to lunch, I could just say, you want to go over downstairs to Fine and Shapiro, to the nice Jewish deli down there, or you want to go down to the Japanese restaurant, or you want to go over to Houlihan's down the street, let's go. And get up and walk there, and not rely on someone else to guide me and take me there. That wasn't arrogance. That was just a factor of the way it needed to be, because if I started appearing like, oh, I couldn't find my way around without being led by someone, how's that going to help if we're negotiating contracts? It also served another purpose. The other purpose was that I knew that I wasn't going to get access to information about what to do in an emergency unless I sought it out. And so I learned what all the emergency evacuation procedures were. I learned how to deal with those in terms of getting out, participating in fire drills, participating in all the emergency evacuation procedure, processes. And I did that so that I would know, because I knew that even my employees, primarily salespeople, were not going to be in the office all the time. That meant that they weren't going to be able to know all the rules and regulations or just the procedures to keep themselves alive. And what if we had to get out in an emergency situation where the halls were filled with smoke? No one's going to be able to read the signs to say, go here. If they didn't know, they weren't going to be able to necessarily have as great a chance of surviving. For my part, I needed to know, because I would have to help other people, and more important, I would have to be able to help myself. So it was important for me to know, not rely on signs or other kinds of data. I had to know. And so every day I went into the World Trade Center, I kept thinking, what am I going to do today if there's an emergency? And I would truly make sure I understood the complex. I love to tell people, you could drug me and knock me out, and I'll wake up somewhere in the World Trade Center, and within about 5 seconds I'd know where I was. That's because I took the time to get that acquainted with the environment. And I submit that it doesn't matter whether you're blind or sighted, we all should do that. It should be that in an emergency situation, you should be able to react from a standpoint of the power of knowledge, not just looking at signs. It's not smart to be lazy. It also helps develop a mindset. Well, if there is an emergency today, what am I going to do? And I will know because I took the time to do it. And I submit that's something that we mostly don't do. We rely on all those signs. We rely on one thing or another. Now, I understand that if you're not normally in a building, the signs are going to help. And then at the same time, we need to do things to make sure that all people are acquainted with the processes in terms of which door do we go out and whatever the case happens to be. One of my favorite stories is this. I go into a hotel, I make sure I know where the emergency exits are on my floor. One day, however, I went into a brand new Ritz-Carlton hotel down in Florida. I was going to be in the hotel for 3 hours to deliver a speech. They gave me a room so that I could change because I had flown in from California, so I wasn't going to wear a suit on the airplane and all that. So they gave me this room. And what I didn't do was even at that point take the step of saying, so where are the emergency exits? I got to the room. Now, we had walked upstairs from the first floor, so I had an idea, but still I hadn't really asked. I changed clothes. I was prepared to leave to go down and do the speech to Federal Express. Suddenly the fire alarms went off. And there I was in this room. So I did walk out of the room, and somebody said, this is the way to go to get to the emergency exit, come this way, and we made it down. But I'll remember to this day that I should have known for sure, even though I was only going to be in that hotel a few hours, I should have known for sure where the exits were and how to deal with the emergency and what the process would be. And I submit, again, that's something that we all should do. Knowledge is absolute power, and knowledge can save your life. So for me, it has become a way of life to make sure that I am as prepared as I can be. A couple of years ago, I was speaking in Missouri at the Midwest Risk Management Association Emergency Preparedness Conference. Out of that conference, people who worked for one of the power companies in Missouri, actually changed their training procedures, and they trained the people who worked down in the substation to get out blindfolded. They put some pathway markings on the floor that people could feel with their feet, and they taught people to get out blindfolded, which is very helpful because the reality is smoke-filled area means you're not going to know how to get out. And if all you rely on are the signs, you're in serious trouble. So I thought that was a cool thing for them to do, and I think it makes perfect sense to do. Emergency preparedness is extremely important, otherwise we wouldn't be here, otherwise you all would not be doing the things that you do. But it's important that all people be included in emergency preparedness. Look at what happened after Hurricane Katrina. A lot of people with guide dogs got separated from their dogs. People, the evacuating officials wouldn't take the guide dogs. Well, we can't take dogs. Well, it's a guide dog. And they didn't have a process or the foresight on the spot to recognize the importance of taking that blind person's guide dog. We have to become smarter at dealing with emergency preparedness, and we have to become more sensitive, because I know that no matter what I say, people aren't going to necessarily prepare nearly as well as they should in terms of dealing with persons with any kind of a disability. We lost some people in the World Trade Center who were in wheelchairs. One person on the 15th floor of one of the towers was in a power chair using a respirator, and there was no way to get him down. He was lost, and a friend stayed with him. Whether there was enough technology at that time to get him out using an escape chair that would go down the stairs, I don't know. I think there may have been, but there was no preparation to make that happen. And the other part was the respirator, which meant a fairly decent sized battery. So I don't know enough about all of that technology to know whether the outcome could have been different. But I do know that there were other people in the buildings who did get out, who had chairs that were made to be wheeled downstairs, and they did get out of the buildings. Now, the other side of that was that later I started hearing a rumor that people wanted to pass legislation that because we had lost some persons with disabilities in the towers, that no person with a disability should be allowed to work above the first floor in a building. And I took the position, thought it was a great idea. Let's pass the law. But I want one amendment to the law, because buildings were hit by airplanes since they were taller than 1 story. We should also pass a law that says that no building should be taller than 1 story. I mean, you know, the ridiculousness of saying a person with a disability shouldn't work above the first floor talks all about how people truly view us. We're not viewed as equals. We're not viewed as having talent, and we're not viewed as being competent. It happens time and time again. And so the only way for us to truly prepare for an emergency is to make sure that everyone is prepared. One of the procedures that I propose is that if you have an office full of people, or if you have a number of offices full of people for different companies in a tall building like the World Trade Center, you should create a system, not a buddy system where 2 people look out for each other, but a triumvirate. I think that you can have a buddy system where 2 people working in the same office can help, but I think there should be another person in another office who is also responsible for making sure that the other 2 people get out, and likewise they're responsible for that person, so that you cover offices other than your own by having people work together. And the triple buddy system, I think, gives a lot greater coverage than just dealing with 2 people in the same office looking out for each other, because you could very well be separated, as did happen more than once in the World Trade Center. It's a reasonable procedure, and it's a sensible procedure. And it's a procedure that can help save even more lives should we ever have another emergency like 9/11. Well, let me tell you a little bit about my story on September 11th specifically, and I think you can see why I have some of the ideas and feel the way I do, and why I'm making some of the suggestions that I do. I've already told you that I spent a lot of time learning the Trade Center in and out, not just the World Trade Center, but how to travel around New York City, truly building up maps so that I knew pretty much where I was at any given time, not always down to the building, but certainly down to the street. And if I went into a building, I learned where it was without any great difficulty. Sometimes I had problems learning where buildings were. For example, one of my favorite restaurants in New York City is a restaurant called Virgil's. Anybody ever been there or heard of it? No? You get to New York, go to Virgil's. Here is a blanket statement: best barbecue in the United States. Best. Virgil's is owned by people who went to all the major well-known barbecue restaurants, learned how they did the things they do, and they brought it all back to create their own barbecue. And they did a great job. Virgil's is wonderful. 164 West 44th Street, between 6th and 7th on the south side of the street. So there. Anyway, I was trying to get to Virgil's one day, and I got to the area, and I could smell the barbecue, but I didn't know where it was. I hadn't really gone there independently before. So I asked someone, I'm looking for Virgil's. Do you see the sign? Well, I'm new around here. I don't know where anything is. I love that answer. So they don't use their eyes. I'd love to make sure I'm not wherever they are in an emergency, right? And so I asked somebody else, well, no, I don't see it. And then about 30 seconds later, oh, excuse me, you're standing right in front of the door. The sign's right above me. Again, I'd love to be with that person in an emergency. Not. Gee. Anyway, I can find Virgil's anytime I want now, and do when I get the chance. Anyway, so I learned the city. For me, September 11th started at 12:30 in the morning on September 11th. We had arranged to conduct some special training seminars for some of our partners on 9/11, the reseller partners who sold our computer products to their customers. The products I was selling were tape backup products. That is, we provided the devices that people used to record all the data transactions and all of the information that went through their network. So like if you were a Wall Street investment firm, you would use our products to create copies of all of your data transactions, which the Securities and Exchange Commission required that you keep for 7 years. All that data would go on tapes and it would be stored somewhere off-site. How helpful that was after 9/11. So we sold those products. I was hired by the company to open an office, which I did, on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. 78 floors is like more than 3 football fields high. And at 12:30, I was awakened by my guide dog, Roselle, because Roselle is afraid of thunder. And about a half hour before a thunderstorm, she would start reacting, and we knew a thunderstorm was coming because she reacted to the static charge buildup in her fur. It was a very uncomfortable feeling, as we've since learned, talking to experts on such things. And I went downstairs with Roselle to my office, where we stayed for about an hour and a half while the thunderstorm passed directly over our house. I had my stereo turned up loud. I was making as much noise as I could. I was producing some material in Braille. The Braille embossers are very loud. But none of that mattered because that storm was so loud that it just overcame everything. The storm literally went right over our house. It was amazing. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the weather had calmed down and we went back up to bed. Did I think that was an omen of something? No, we've had storms before, and nothing led me to believe that there was going to be anything different. So we stood there and waited and sat and waited, and then the storm went away. We went back up, went to bed, woke up at 5. We had invited 50 people to come to one of 4 seminars that day. So I went in the office, got there in time to set up my materials. We had invited the Port Authority cafeteria down on the 44th floor to bring up breakfast for the early arrivals. They did. Some of the best ham and cheese croissants in the city. Anyway, and so there we were. At 8 o'clock, David Frank, a colleague from our corporate office, had arrived as well. He had brought some of our early guests' arrivals from Ingram Micro, the distributor that was sponsoring the event for a number of the people. So most everyone, there were about, well, I think there were 5 Ingram Micro people that were in the office, and an additional one went downstairs to direct people to where they needed to go. David and I were in my office finishing some final preparations for the seminar. I had already set up the PowerPoint projector and done the things that we needed to do. Yes, that's right, blind people can do PowerPoint, computers talk, and I had a script that was about this size that had all of the information on it about every slide, not only a description of what each picture showed, but the actual wording that was on the slide. So I could do slides as well as anyone else. Not a big deal. So we were prepared. The last thing we had to do before starting the seminars was to create a list of the people who would be attending. Because of the bombing, it was important that no one get in the building without being authorized. If you were authorized to get in the building, it was because in advance somebody had sent a list of all of the people who would be coming to whatever meeting down to the security people. It came on letterhead, and that way they knew it was from the company, and those people on the list would then be allowed to go up after having a picture taken of them and it laminated into a badge that they had to wear around their necks at all times while in the building. The badge also had a barcode that allowed you to unlock the elevators to get in, or actually unlock the bar to get to the elevators to get in. I was reaching for stationery to put into the printer to print the list of 50 people who would be coming. David was ready to feed the printer when suddenly we heard a muffled explosion. The building kind of shook. And then if you imagine my arm as the tower, the building literally began to tip. It just started tipping and tipping and tipping. We actually moved about 20 feet that day. The building tipped, as we now know, because tall buildings like that are actually made to be springs. They're made to buffet in windstorms and even be hit by an airplane. Like one airplane hit the Empire State Building in the 1940s. It was lost in a fog bank and crashed into the building. They're made to be flexible. They're literally big springs. So the plane hit the building on 9/11 and the building started to tip. If it had just been an airplane hitting the building would have survived. The problem is that the airplane was loaded with 26,000 pounds of airplane fuel that immediately ignited, so it was a big bomb. The heat and the explosion from the fuel damaged the infrastructure that eventually caused the towers to collapse. A lot of people have asked, why did the building collapse? And as some engineers and architects involved in the World Trade Center design said, the people really should be asking the question, why did they stay up so long? And the answer really is because they were built well and the building did everything that it was supposed to do. Anyway, the building kept tipping. David was in my office. We were speculating, what's going on? Was it an earthquake? David asked. I said, no, it wasn't an earthquake. The building wasn't shaking around. It was just tipping. Think it was an explosion? I don't know how or why, I said. And David said, yeah, I don't know. I don't understand what's going on. I, however, had grown up in Palmdale, California, so I learned a long time ago, building moves, go stand in a doorway, and I stood in the doorway. A lot of good that really would do 78 floors up, right? But nevertheless, I stood in the doorway. Roselle was asleep under my desk. David was just holding on to my desk, and we kept tipping. And finally, David and I said goodbye to each other because we thought we were about to take a 78-floor plunge to the street. And I remember just holding my breath, waiting for that to happen, and then suddenly the building slowed down. It stopped, and it began moving back the other way. Slowly moved, and I remember letting out my breath, and finally it kept moving and picking up speed, and it became vertical again. As soon as it did, I went into my office, and I met Roselle coming out from under my desk. I took her leash, and I told her to heel, which meant to come around on my left side and to sit like Africa just did. Good girl. About that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. The reason it dropped down was because the expansion joints in the springs were going back to their normal configuration. But who knew that at the time? I had participated in all the emergency evacuation procedures and so on, but they didn't go into a lot of the theory of the building. So I didn't, although I should have thought about it, I should have realized that's what's going on. I have a master's degree in physics and am pretty technical. I should have thought about that, but I didn't, so that's okay. There's other things on the brain, you know. So the building dropped. Roselle just sat there wagging her tail. As soon as the building stopped moving, David released his hold from my desk, turned and looked out the window and started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our window. We got to get out of here right now. The building's on fire. We can't stay here." I could hear the debris falling outside the window, and I said, "David, slow down. We'll get out." "No, we got to get out of here right now." "Slow down, David. We'll get out." "We got to get out of here right now." Our guests began to scream. They started moving toward our exit. And they were going away from the conference room where they were. And David kept saying, we got to get out of here. The building's on fire. We can't stay here. And I kept saying, slow down, David. We'll get out, but just don't panic. No, we got to get out of here right now. And then the big line, you don't understand. You can't see it. It's always the line. The problem is, it wasn't what I couldn't see. It's what David wasn't seeing. I have since developed a phrase which I often use these days, which is the only true form of blindness comes to those who only see with their eyes and not with their vision. The problem with what David was seeing and not seeing was that he wasn't seeing a dog just sitting next to me, wagging her tail, yawning, going, who woke me up? You've probably read stories about animals that got their humans out of buildings because they detected smoke and fire and so on, and they became concerned and they got their people out and they got their people moving and then discovered there was fire or whatever. But the animals saved the people because they alerted them. Roselle wasn't doing any of that. I'd been working with Roselle by that time for 42 months. So we knew each other. I take that back. It was 22 months. She was 3.5, but we had been working together for almost 2 years. So I knew her. See, I think it takes a really good, solid year to develop the relationship that's a completely interdependent, synergistic, empathetic relationship that allows us to work together. When we go to get a guide dog, what we really learn is how to build a team. Most people think the dog just takes me wherever I'm supposed to go. And I'm here to tell you, the dog is not the brains of the outfit. It's not the dog's job to know where to go. It's not the dog's job to know how to get there. Her job is to make sure we walk safe. If I pick up the harness and tell her to go forward, it's because I want to go forward because I know where I want to go. Her job is to guide around chairs or whatever the case happens to be and keep us safe. My job is to be the navigator and give the directions step by step. Her job is to make sure that then we carry them out to get us where we need to go. So we learn to build a teaming relationship. The closest knit team that you can imagine, as close as any SEAL Team 6 or whatever the case happens to be. That's what we get with a guide dog. And so on that day, I noticed that she wasn't reacting in any kind of negative way. That told me that whatever was going on wasn't so imminently close to us that we needed to panic. And it took a while to get David to focus. And finally, when I was able to get him to listen, I said, look, just take our guests to the stairs, start them down, and then we'll leave. Do not let them take elevators. Because I knew that the center of the building was a hollow core where all the elevators were, and that if there was fire above us, although we didn't know what was causing it, it could possibly get to elevators. And so the last thing you wanted to do was to send anybody to their death by putting them in an elevator. And it happened to people. So David left to do that. I called my wife Karen at our home in New Jersey and told her that there had been an explosion or something that happened in the World Trade Center and that we were going to be leaving the area. I should explain that Karen also is a person with a disability. She's in a wheelchair. She was using a manual chair at that time, so it's a great relationship. She reads, I push, works out really well. She helped me fulfill my lifelong ambition. You know, I kept telling people when they'd ask me what I wanted to be, I'd always say, because it was the hippie culture in the 60s when I was growing up, when I grow up, I want to be a pusher, man, you know. So I married her, and it's legal. So any cops in the room, just arrest me because I say I'm a pusher and see how far you get. Actually, now she uses a power chair, so I got to run for my life most of the time. But she wanted to know what happened. I said, look, I really don't know. We didn't know. Of course, a lot of people said to me after, well, of course you didn't know because you couldn't see it. And I sort of sit there and just do the equivalent of an eye roll because I don't really know how to roll my eyes. And I go, help me out here. Did we invent X-ray vision and I don't know anything about it? Look, the airplane hit 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. There was no way that any of us knew what happened. There was no way to know. So in any case, David got our guests to the stairs and he came back. I hung up with my wife, Karen. We swept the office, and then by 8:50, we were in the stairwell starting down. Almost immediately, I began smelling an odor. It took me about 3 or 4 floors to recognize I'm smelling what I smell every time I go to an airport, because I did a lot of travel for my company. And I'm smelling that same odor. We must be smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. And I observed that to other people around me, and they said, "You're right. We couldn't figure out what it was, but that must be what it is. We were hit by an airplane." So we assumed that, although we didn't know it for sure, that was our assumption going down the stairs, that we were hit by an airplane. We walked down several floors. We got down about 10 floors when suddenly we heard from above us somebody shouting, "Burn victim coming through, move to the side of the stairs." The stairs were wide enough that we could do that, so we stepped to the outside of the stairs and turned facing inward. Soon a group of people surrounding a woman who was very badly burned over the upper part of her body passed us on the stairs going on down. David described the scene to me, and I don't need to get graphic or anything, but he described it to me, and she was pretty badly burned, but able to walk and probably in shock. Walked on down the stairs, then we continued to walk down. We got down about 2 or 3 more floors when we heard it again from above us. "Burn victim coming through, move to the side." And another person, even more severely burned than the first, passed us. Immediately after that, a woman near us on the stairs stopped and she said, "I can't go on, I can't breathe, we're not going to make it out of here." About 8 or 9 of us stopped on the stairs, turned, surrounded her, and literally had a group hug right there on the stairs. We said to her, "Come on, you can do it." I said, "We're okay, just let's work together, let's get out, you can do it." Roselle gave her kisses, other people encouraged her, and she was able to continue going down the stairs. We knew that we didn't dare allow panic on the stairs. We knew that we had to keep everyone focused, not just me, but other people who clearly understood that. And New Yorkers are used to being in crowded stairwells going down the stairs anyway, but we knew that if panic started on the stairs, then no one would have made it out. We'd all be trampling each other. We had to keep everyone focused. We got down to about the 50th floor, and then my friend David said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." And I just said, "Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you." And literally, I snapped at him, very deliberately to get him to focus. See, when I was in college, I went to get my secondary teaching credential. And as you can tell, I passed Voice 101. I know how to yell at kids, right? Anyway, so I got David to focus, and then he said, "Thanks. I'm going to go down the stairs a floor below you, and I'm going to shout up to you everything I see on the stairs." He told me later that snapping at him brought him out of his funk, and that he decided to go down the stairs a floor just to have something else to think about by yelling up to me what he saw. I think that was incredible. Not because he was shouting to me. I mean, yeah, it's nice, it's appreciated. Wouldn't have made a difference if something were going to happen, it was going to happen. But what David did by going down a floor and shouting up to me was that he became a point of focus for anyone on the stairs who could hear his voice. "Hey, Mike, I'm at the 48th floor. Everything is clear here. Going on down." Think of the people below him who had already been there. "Well, it's still okay up there. I can keep going." And the people above, "Everything must be good going down the stairs from here." And they listen for his voice at every floor. 47th floor, everything is clear. He gave so many people something on which to focus. That had to help keep panic away. We didn't have one person panic after that. Meanwhile, I was upstairs getting bored, walking down all these stairs, so I started thinking to my physics esoteric brain, how many stairs are we going to walk down? Because I don't count stairs. I don't count stairs anywhere. And I don't even listen to people when we're going upstairs who say, "Oh, we're coming to a flight of stairs, you got 6 stairs to go up." The reason I never listen to them is they're always wrong. They're off by a stair. But that's not actually the real reason I don't listen. The real reason is that I need to maintain the discipline of letting the dog do its job. The dog will start and will stop at the stairs, and then I say forward, the dog will go up the stairs, and I will know when the dog gets to the top. If I start anticipating the dog, I'm going to break training. Can't do it. That's the dog's job. So I don't listen when people tell me numbers of stairs. They think I need to know it. I don't count stairs any more than any of you do. All y'all walk up the stairs, and when you see the top stair, you go up it, and there you go, the top step, and there you go. I go up the stairs, and when Roselle gets to the top, the harness levels out, and we keep going. Same thing. Anyway, David, act as a focal point. That was so cool, I thought. 46th floor, and I'm thinking, as I said, how many stairs are we going down? So I start counting. Okay, I'm on the 47th floor, he's on 46. Roselle, forward, down some stairs, 10 to be exact, left, left, forward, down 9 more stairs, and then we're at the 46th floor. David, 45th floor, all clear, going on down. Roselle, forward, down 10 steps. Good girl. Left, left, forward, down 9 stairs. What a good girl. Keep going, good girl. Get to the bottom. David, 44th floor, this is where the Port Authority cafeteria is, not stopping. Going on down, and I'm at the 45th floor. Forward, down 10 steps. Left, left, forward, down 9 steps. Well, 19 stairs between floors. That seems to be pretty consistent. For the sake of argument right now, let's assume it stays that way all the way down, which means we went from 78 to 1, 77 floors, 19 steps between floors. So how many stairs are we going down? 19 times 77 equals? No calculators, please. No calculators, you can't use them. I didn't have one, you can't. 1,463 stairs. Guys are slow. Anyway, 1463, I get to the 44th floor, we keep going down. I did have a fear. And finally, about the 40th floor, it got a little bit too much to deal with, or not deal with. My fear was, what am I going to do being on the stairs with all of these people? We had power and lights and air conditioning. What would happen if the power suddenly went out? I'd be stuck on the stairs with thousands of functionally blind people who couldn't find their way out of a paper bag. Because there were no windows in the stairs. It was a cocoon going all the way down. We're in the middle of the building. No windows, no nothing. And I decided I had to deal with that. So I took the approach that airline flight attendants do. You know, they give that speech at the beginning about how to get out of the airplane and so on. My favorite is one on Southwest. This person gets up and goes, I want everyone to listen. There may be 50 ways to leave your lover, but there are only 6 ways to leave this airplane, and if you want to know what they are, you better listen to me. I love it. But you know, they give that speech, they tell you about where the emergency exits are. What they never do is tell you the row numbers of the emergency exits, which doesn't help me. In fact, I end up having to deal with that all the time because they come back and they say they want to brief me. And I always, of course, go in through the same front door as everyone else. I like to sit near the front of the plane whenever possible, which is most of the time. I'm Executive Platinum on American, so I often actually get upgraded. I'm sitting there in the first class cabin or whatever. The flight attendant comes up and says, I got to give you a briefing. You came in through the front entrance. That's like little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and can't tell where to find them. Of course she can't tell where to find them. She lost them. You know, I came in the front entrance. Yeah, just like everyone else. And if there's an emergency, you will go out through the front entrance of the airplane and you just wait till all the passengers are gone and then we'll come and get you. Hear it all the time. Several fallacies with that comment. 1, and I point out to them, I may not go out the front entrance. What if the door is jammed and I can't get out? Well, you wait for us. No. Where are the overwing emergency exits? What row numbers? Well, you don't need to know. Yes, I do. This is an airplane and you're all about safety and emergency preparedness. Where are they? Well, if there's an emergency, we'll come and get you. I said, what if you're killed? No. Where are the emergency exits? You know the real reason they don't tell me? Anybody want to guess? They don't know. They don't know the row numbers. Well, the configuration of every airplane is a little bit different. Not really, but even if it is, That should be part of your emergency preparedness, Mr. or Miss Flight Attendant or Mrs. Flight Attendant. You should know those row numbers, and you should be announcing them up front to all passengers. But they don't know, and they don't take the time to get prepared. The other thing they always want to do is to put me and my guide dog in the bulkhead. Oh, but there's more room for the guide dog in the bulkhead. Not by the time the dog takes it all up, there isn't. But more important, as I point out, and sometimes it has been really hard to get them to listen, but I point out by starting this way, because it's been visible in the news. How many aircraft have been subjected to severe air turbulence this year and people became injured because they weren't wearing their seatbelts? And I ask that of these people, and it always stops them. I said, and I always say, I know of at least 5, including one where a person bounced up so high that they crashed their head into the top roof, broke the roof, and got a skull fracture. And the reality is, if my dog is in the bulkhead row, there's nothing restraining her from bouncing around. When we're in a non-bulkhead row, she goes under the seat in front of me with her head facing back between my feet, which keeps her completely restrained, and it allows me to completely control her even if she were to panic. Oh, but there's more room for the dog in the bulkhead. Not really. But it's not truly emergency preparedness. They don't really understand what it means to prepare everyone for an emergency. And that's the problem. So in any case, I'm sitting there in the stairwell thinking about the fact, what am I going to do if the lights go out? And I decided to take the approach of the flight attendant briefing, because when they do that briefing, they're also watching passengers to see who's paying attention, because those are the people they're going to call on to help them, because they're a little bit more prepared. Would that they would go all the way with that. In any case, so I said to the people in the stairwell, anyone who could hear me, I spoke up nice and loud and said, hey everyone, my name is Mike. I happen to be blind. I've got a guide dog here. And I want you to know that if the power and lights go out, Roselle and I are offering a half-price special to get you out today only. I wanted people to laugh, but I also wanted them to think about it and know that if there were a problem, there is a solution that would help get people out. We didn't have to use it, but it was there. We walked down about 5 more floors. It was about 35th floor, and people were starting to get really quiet again, and I knew what happened when David got quiet. So I like to keep people laughing and keep people talking. So I said something like, you know what, they're not going to allow us back into this building for a while because we didn't know how bad it was. But on the first day back, why don't we all meet on the 78th floor at about 8:45 in the morning and walk down the stairs together? What a great way to lose weight, huh? You'll notice that I didn't say let's go from the bottom up to the 78th floor. Hey, that physics comes in handy when you talk about gravity, you know. I'd rather go down than up. Anyway, we kept going down. David, 34th floor, 33, 32nd floor, everything is good. Some of us were talking up above and just walking. 31st floor, hey, I'm at the 30th floor and I see firefighters, first responders coming up the stairs. He just called them firefighters. First responders came later, of course. Anyway, they're coming up the stairs and everybody moved to the side and let them by. I go down to the 30th floor where David is and I say, what do you see? And he said, well, they're coming up the stairs, they're dressed in their heavy protective clothing, and they've got packs on their backs. They may be carrying like 100 pounds. I think it was like about 50 or 60, but you know, who knew, right? And then finally the first guy got to us and he stops in front of me. Now what we learned later was it took them a minute to go from one floor up to the next. They had to carry all of their equipment up, as probably many of you know, because they couldn't rely on equipment being available upstairs, and they didn't store a lot of stuff upstairs because they knew that what they had to do was to carry it to make sure they had what they needed to fight whatever came along. Anyway, the first guy stops in front of me and he goes, hey buddy, you okay? You know how they talk back there in New York, right? Huh? Bada bing, bada boom. Or, it's nice to see you, I'm Vito Corleone. They talk funny back there, what can I tell you? Anyway, he stops and he says that, hey buddy, you okay? And I say, yeah, I'm really good. Well, that's really nice. We're going to send somebody down the stairs with you to make sure you get out. And I said, no, you don't need to do that. I'm really good. I came down from the 78th floor to the 30th floor. I really know how to do this. We're good. Well, that's nice, but we're going to send somebody with you anyway. With you? W-I-T-Y-A. With you. They talk good. I said, look, I really am okay. Because I knew what was going to happen. This guy's going to grab my elbow and lift me up when we start down every stair, flight of stairs at least. I mean, I've been subjected to that by people so many times. And it's not only not going to help, it's going to hinder. And I said, look, I really am okay. It wasn't a time I give him a lecture about the fact that blindness isn't the handicap, it's your attitude about blindness that's the real challenge. So I just said, look, I got my guide dog and we're okay going down the stairs. And he said, oh, that's really nice. What a nice dog. And he starts petting Roselle. It also wasn't the time to give him a lecture. Don't pet a guide dog in harness. Do not interact with a guide dog in harness. And I'm telling all of you that now. Do not, anytime you see a dog in harness, do not touch, talk to, and in fact, try not to even look at. Do not interact with. The dog has a job to do. And part of that dog is listening to the person who is its teammate. But if you start petting the dog, if you start interacting with the dog, you're going to distract the dog. So many times I've been somewhere and people say, oh, can I pet your dog? And I say, no, please don't. They start petting the dog, and Roselle, or Africa now, loves to get attention, right? They're dogs. But as soon as the dog starts to react in ways other than I expect, and I know that the dog's being petted, I will correct the dog. And the people always say, oh, well, why are you doing that? Why are you punishing the dog? I'm the one that was petting the dog. I said, no, you don't understand. The dog should know better. I'm going to deal with her, and then I'll deal with you. Do not interact with the dog in harness. Do not interact with a service dog. You can ask, and I may say no, but I also will say, wait a minute, as much as I can, take the harness off, because then the dog knows that it's off work, off duty, and then it can visit. The dogs need time to relax too. So I'll take the harness off whenever I can and let the dogs flirt. There have been a few times that hasn't happened, and there wasn't really much I could do about it. We were in the Admirals Club in Los Angeles one day, and I was at the counter. There was this guy, he was talking to the flight agent, talking about his ticket. He was having a problem with his ticket there. You know, he wasn't getting the satisfaction he needed. The reservation was all screwed up. I knew the voice, right? Sounded something like what I'm saying, you know. Clearly the guy was just not totally happy with the situation whatsoever. It was Columbo, Peter Falk, right? And I never ask people for their autograph. I'm standing right next to him, but the reservations person at the Admirals Club goes away, and I just turn to him and I go, don't you hate paperwork? He goes, yeah, you know, they're doing their best, but this is really kind of a little frustrating situation here. And then he goes, so what's your dog's name? Everybody always asks that. And I go, her name is Linny. And he just naturally reaches out, hey, Linny, how are you? The next thing, he's down on the floor. Linny, as she always did, this was my fourth guide dog, Linny was on her back, all 4 feet in the air, and Peter Falk's down there petting him. Linny was always known as stop, drop, and roll. Linny would drop at the slightest sign you're looking at her, and she'd flip over to get attention. So he's down there for about 5 minutes, and finally goes, Linny, I can't stay down here and scratch you all night. And I go, yeah, you can, just ask her. Anyway, so sometimes, you know, there are always exceptions. But the point was that you don't deal, and the point is, you don't deal with dogs that are working dogs without asking, and then you accept the answer. I will always allow people to pet her if I can. If I'm in a hurry and I can't, I can't. Anyway, so it wasn't time to give the guy the lecture about that. So finally I just said, look, I'm working with my friend David over here. David can see, and we're good. And he turns to David, you're with him? And David goes, yeah, leave him alone, he's good. He says, okay. He gives Roselle a few last pets, and he says, you go down the stairs, we're going up. And he walks by and goes on up the stairs, probably having received the last unconditional love he ever got in his life. Now, why did I resist his help so much? The answer is, really, that he's part of a team. He was the first guy up. I don't know whether that was significant or not, but he's part of a team. We didn't know how bad it was, but I know that I didn't want to allow one of that group of people going up the stairs to separate themselves and take me down the stairs, And then I hear on the news later how somebody got injured because one of their colleagues was helping a blind man go down the stairs. I wasn't going to break up a team, especially when there was no need to do it. I appreciate what all of you deal with. I appreciate what first responders of all kinds deal with. Teamwork is important. And I will not be responsible for breaking up a team if I can help it. If I really needed assistance going down the stairs, yeah, that's one thing. And I know that's part of their job. But not if it isn't necessary. And I think I'm in the best position to judge my capabilities. There was nothing going on the stairs. No one was saying anything that indicated there was going to be any trouble going down the stairs. So I made a judgment call not to break up a team. So we keep going on down the stairs. David reassumed his scouting position. We got down to about the 26th floor, and David said, hey, someone's passing up water bottles, and he brought one up because it's getting pretty hot on the stairs, the press of bodies. The firefighters, men and women alike, passed us and were passing us on the stairs. They were taking up part of the stairwell, so it's getting pretty hot with all the bodies. Roselle was panting, so David made his hand into a cup. We poured some water in, and Roselle got some water. David got some water, I got some water. And we finished the bottle, and then David went on down and reassumed his scout position, and we followed down the stairs. 25th floor, everything is good. Hey, 24th floor, 23rd floor, no problems. Still firefighters coming up the stairs. 22nd floor, on down, forward, down 10 stairs, left, forward, down 9 stairs, get to the next floor. So the 19 steps between floors was holding. We're going on down, and finally David said, at the first floor, hey, the water sprinklers are on. You're going to have to run through a curtain of water to get out of the stairwell. The sprinklers were on, creating a curtain of water so that if fire did come racing down the stairs, it couldn't get into the lobby, or if it broke out in the lobby, the drafts wouldn't be able to pull it into the stairs and it come up the stairs, and people could go up to the second floor and get out another way. I got down to the first floor and heard this torrential downpour of water, and immediately grabbed Roselle's harness, took her harness, said forward, hop up, which is a command to speed up, and we burst through this incredible torrential downpour of water. Came out the other side, soaking wet, into the lobby of One World Trade Center, which was now ankle deep in water because all the doors were those revolving doors, and literally they're watertight enough that it was filling up the building. And people were shouting, go this way, no, don't go over there, don't go outside. If you went outside, you'd have been below where the plane hit, and I think also because people were jumping, they didn't want anyone to go out there. So go this way. We were rushed toward the central part of the complex. This guy comes up to me and David, and he introduces himself as a member of the FBI, and I'm sort of sitting there going, I didn't do it, but anyway. He introduced himself as somebody from the FBI, and I said, well, the FBI, what's going on? He said, well, no time to really tell you, but we're here, the Port Authority police are here, the New York Police Department, the New York Fire Department is here, and we're getting everybody out. So just follow me. He rushed us through to the central part of the World Trade Center, right outside Tower 1, which is a shopping mall. And it had all the things you'd find in a shopping mall. There was a Duane Reade drugstore, there were several office buildings, there was a 24-hour passport photo shop, Radio Shack, great fun at Christmas time with all the toys. There was a Hallmark store, and then there were also the important things that you needed to have in a shopping mall. Right outside our door in the central part of the complex was Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Godiva chocolate, you know, the important things. So we ran through this area, this big open concourse, normally full of thousands of people shopping, now totally quiet. You could hear your feet as you ran, you could hear your footfalls. We were raced through up an escalator, and at 9:45 in the morning, an hour after the plane hit, we finally made it outside into the sunlight. We got outside, and immediately we were told, leave the complex. But before we did, David looked around and he said, Mike, I see fire in Tower 2. We didn't know. We had no clue. We didn't feel anything. We had no knowledge of what happened. We were isolated in there. You guys had it worse than we, because we had no clue what was going on. We left the complex. We walked over to Broadway. started walking north on Broadway. We were on the west side of the street, so right to my left was a building. We crossed over several streets. We finally got to Fulton Street, crossed Fulton, went up to the next block, which was Ann Street to the right, Maiden Lane to the left. That took us down to would have taken us to the New York Stock Exchange. We stopped there because David said, I want to take pictures of what I'm seeing in the tower. I want to take pictures of the fire because I see it really clearly in Tower 2. We're kind of diagonally 100 yards away from it. Remember, it's 400 yards tall. And so we stopped. David got out his camera, started taking pictures. I got out my phone. I tried to call my wife, Karen. I couldn't get through. The circuits were busy. We know now, of course, that that was because everyone was saying goodbye. Goodbye to the people up in the towers who couldn't make it out. David was putting his camera away. I had just put my phone away when suddenly a police officer yelled, "Get the hell out of here, it's coming down!" And we heard this rumble that quickly became this deafening roar. I described the sound as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear glass breaking and clattering and metal clashing and crashing down, and this white noise sound as the building collapsed. Everyone turned and ran. David turned and ran. He was long gone. It was just Roselle and me. We turned 180 degrees and now started running south on Broadway with the building right to my right-hand side. I could hear debris falling around us. I heard what sounded like a little bit of an overhang above me, so we stayed right as close to the side of the building as we could as we ran. And we kept running. And I remember thinking as soon as I started to run, God, I can't believe that you got us out of a building just to have it fall on us. And as soon as I thought that, I heard in my head, as clearly as you hear me, a voice that said, don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on running with Roselle and the rest will take care of itself. And then I had this sense of inner peace and certainty that if we worked together, we'd be okay. We kept running. We got to the corner of Fulton and Broadway. I told Roselle, right, turn right on Broadway. She did turn right. We ran maybe 10, 15 yards, and suddenly I caught up to David. David had realized that he had gotten separated from us, and so he stopped and was going to come back, but by that time I had caught up with him. And he apologized, and I said, don't worry about it, it's okay, let's just keep going, the building's coming down. And we started to run. Almost immediately we became engulfed in the dust cloud. All the dirt and debris and fine particles from the breakup of Tower 2. It was so thick, this cloud, that as David said, you couldn't see your hand 6 inches in front of your face. I can tell you it was so thick that with every breath I took, I could feel the dirt going down my throat and settling in my lungs. Well, if that's what smoking feels like, I sure don't ever want to do it. And I'm sure it was even worse than what it would be like with smoking, but in any case, I didn't like that feeling at all. I could feel it settling. We kept running, and we knew that we were going to suffocate if we stayed in this cloud, so I started telling Roselle, right. I don't know whether she could hear me. I don't know whether she could see my hand signals, but we kept running to try to get into a building, the building that we were running next to. Suddenly, I heard an opening to my right. Try it sometime. Walk down a hall, close your eyes with an open doorway somewhere down the hall. You'll learn to hear it. Learn some new techniques that way. Might save your life. In any case, I heard the opening. I kept telling Roselle, right. She obviously either heard or saw my hand signals or both, because she did turn right. She took one step and stopped and wouldn't move. Focus on running with Roselle. I knew that if she stopped, there had to be a reason. So I looked and discovered that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. She had done her job perfectly. She stopped. She did just what she was supposed to do. She got a big hug for it, and then we went downstairs into what turned out to be the Fulton Street subway station. We descended 2 flights, and we found ourselves on a little arcade, the entrance to the station. As I came down the stairs, I heard a woman crying near the bottom of the stairs saying, someone help me, please. My eyes are filled with dirt. I don't want to fall into the subway system. I went over to her because I was close to her when I came down, and I took her arm and I said, hey, don't worry, my name is Mike. I happen to be blind. I've got my guide dog, Roselle, here, and you won't fall into the subway. Besides, you're like about 10 feet away. You're okay. I knew the station. I introduced myself and asked her her name. She said her name was Carol. I said, Carol, just work on clearing out your eyes. You're okay. We were there a minute or so, and then a guy came up the stairs from further down in the subway system. He introduced himself as Lou, an employee of the subway system. He said, I can take you down to an employee locker room. There were about 8 or 9 of us. He took us down the stairs. We went into a locker room. There were some benches. There were other people there. There was a water fountain. There was a fan. People were hacking and coughing, just trying to clear their lungs. We just sat there, not able to understand what was going on. And we sat there for about 10 minutes. Then a police officer came and said, the air is clear up above. You need to leave now. You can't stay here. Without waiting for discussion, he turned, expecting us to follow him, which we did. Back, up the stairs, through the little arcade that I described earlier, up the last 2 flights of stairs, and finally got out into the sunlight. As soon as we got outside, David looked around and he goes, Mike, oh my God, there's no Tower 2 anymore. And I said, David, what do you see? And he said, all I see are pillars of smoke, hundreds of feet tall. You sure there's no tower? Absolutely sure. We stood there, not comprehending, and then we just turned right, going west, now on Fulton, and started walking, moving away. We just continued to walk. We walked about 10 minutes, and then we heard that freight train waterfall sound again. We were in this little plaza area. We thought we were far enough away that we were safe from flying debris, but David did look back and saw a dust cloud coming at us. We moved to the side to get away from the dust cloud. It was pretty concentrated, so we could do that. So we moved to the side, hunkered down, covered our faces, and waited for everything to pass us by. And when the sound diminished and everything became silent, we stood up. David looked around and said, oh my God, Mike, there's no World Trade Center anymore. Again, I asked what he saw, and he said, all I see are fingers of fire and flame hundreds of feet tall and pillars of smoke. It's gone. To think 3 hours before we had just come into that complex to do our daily work, and then in the blink of an eye, it was gone. We stood there in shock for a moment, and then I decided I got to try to call my wife, Karen. This time, I got through. And she's the one who told us how 2 aircraft had deliberately been crashed into the towers, 1 into the Pentagon, and a 4th at that time was still missing over Pennsylvania. We just stood there for a moment and then turned and walked away. We eventually circled back around and got on Broadway heading north again and spent most of the rest of the day getting up toward Midtown Manhattan. We got up to Canal Street and just sat down to rest a little bit. I turned on my radio and heard Rudy Giuliani talking about evacuation and moving further north because there was potential gas leaks and explosions. It was obvious even then how much he cared for the city of New York. It was clear that he was going to do all he could to keep everyone moving and everyone dealing with what we had to deal with. There's Hingson. In fact, in the weeks that followed, he was everywhere. Rudy would be on one side of the city cheering people and encouraging people, and the next moment, 10 minutes later, he was on the other side being a part of a wedding that he had committed to do weeks before. He was everywhere and doing everything. He became the voice and the spirit and heart of New York City. So we all listened to him, and we continued further north. About noon, we stopped at a small Vietnamese restaurant just to sit. We gave them some money so we could use their phone and try to contact people. And I used my cell phone as well. Suddenly, about noon, we heard aircraft outside flying really low, and everyone just held their breaths. What's going on? Somebody went outside, and suddenly we heard them say, hey, it's our guys, they have the skies, it's okay. And everyone just burst into a round of applause. Most people ran out just to watch them flying. And they were clearly sending a message, we've got it. We finally got up to the apartment of a friend of David's about 1:30. We stayed at Nina's apartment for about 2.5 hours. Then I learned that the trains were running again back to New Jersey because we kept in touch with Karen. And so we left. David wanted to get back up to where he was staying with his sister on the Upper East Side of New York, Manhattan. We started walking up toward the train station, Penn Station, which was 34th and 6th, 7th Avenue. Partway, we suddenly saw a bus. Some of the buses were running. We were able to take the bus to 33rd and 6th, then got off and walked over to Penn Station. I found where the next train was leaving from to go out to New Jersey. David and I said goodbye to each other, and he then left to go up to his sister's house. I got on the train and left the city going back to New Jersey. Got to Newark, New Jersey. I learned when the next train would be leaving on the Raritan line. That's the line that went to Westfield. I called Karen, told her what time I'd be in the station in Westfield. By that time, a close friend that Karen had known since high school, Tom Painter, was down with her. He came down not knowing whether I was alive or dead or working in the Trade Center or working at home that day. But he stayed with her, drove her to the station, then he stayed with us for the next week. But at 7 o'clock, I got off the train, heard our van pulling into the train station, and then went across the sidewalk, heard the ramp come down, walked up the ramp into the van, and finally got to hug Karen for the first time that day since I left home. Karen and I were comparing notes later, and we realized we were both thinking the same thing. What else might they have planned that would keep us apart? But we were able to keep going and get back together. We went home. The first thing I did was took Roselle's harness off. I'd planned to take her out, but before I could do that, she was off like a shot. She found her favorite tug bone and my retired guide dog, Linny, and they started playing tug-of-war. If that doesn't put everything in perspective, I don't know what does. She did that for about 10 minutes, and then somebody took her out. I went upstairs and took a shower. I was grimy, filthy, and dirty, and dusty, and then Tom and Karen arranged for dinner to come in, and so then we just sat down and started talking about it. The next day, Karen suggested that I might want to call Guide Dogs for the Blind to tell them about our experience, because that's where Roselle was from, that's where all of my guide dogs have been from, and some of the guide dogs people had visited us in the World Trade Center. So I called them, and their director of public information wanted to put out a little story about us, which I said, okay. And then she said in this little kind of cute voice, you know, you're going to be pretty popular. What TV show do you want to go on? I wasn't thinking about that. So I just said, oh, Larry King Live. 2 days later, on the 14th of September, we had our first of 5 interviews on Larry King Live. During the last one in 2006, I asked Larry if he would be willing to participate in a project. I was going to write a book about our efforts at one point, and if I wrote the book, would he be willing to write the foreword? And he said, absolutely. And so when we did publish Thunderdog, he wrote the foreword, which is really neat. In any case, we continued to try to make sense out of it. Later, I met with people at Guide Dogs for the Blind. We went out to speak. By that time, several people were inviting me to come and speak to their organizations. We had literally hundreds of press interviews, and people were saying, would you come and talk to us about the lessons of 9/11? What should we learn from it? What do we do? And then other people started asking about other kinds of topics. And so I was hired by Guide Dogs for the Blind to be a public spokesperson for them and to go off and find speaking opportunities, and that lasted until a new CEO took over the reins in 2008. And she said, well, you know, with the economic downturn and no one's really interested in 9/11 anymore, we're going to phase out your job. I went, that's really not a wise decision, because we were bringing in more money for guide dogs than anyone. But they did, so I formed my own company, and for the last 6 years, I've been speaking full-time and doing exactly what we're doing here. Talking about 9/11, talking about the lessons to be learned, talking about preparedness, talking about the fact that blindness isn't the challenge that I face, it's the attitudes that people have about blindness. It's those same attitudes that oftentimes prevent us from being smarter and seeing beyond our own noses. And that's our story. Except to say that in 2010, a woman contacted me to interview me for a book she was writing called Dog Tales, and she wanted Roselle's story in it. And as I was talking to Susie Flory and telling her our story, she said, you ought to write your own book, and I'd be glad to help you with it. I had tried several times before and just hadn't gotten anywhere. She said, I've got an agent. I'm sure we can get him interested. Well, she introduced me to her agent, Chip McGregor, who said, we don't need another 9/11 book. And I said, this won't be a 9/11 book. He said, well, send me a proposal. Susie and I wrote a proposal, sent it to him, and I don't know what to say. Chip has a very dry sense of humor, very quiet, but he got just incredibly excited about this. And he sold the contract to Thomas Nelson Publishing. On August 2nd, 2011, Thunderdog was published. 8 days later, I was at my home. My wife was there and a colleague was there, and we were all talking, and suddenly we get a phone call from Thomas Nelson, the marketing people, and they said, we've got to tell you something, but you need to sit down. And they were trying to sound all sad and all that, and I went, well, Karen's sitting down, does that count? And they said, no, you need to sit. And finally, we all sat down, and I said, okay, we're all sitting down. In its first week out, Thunderdog is already on the New York Times bestseller list. It has been #1 on the bestseller list before now, and it still continues to sell well, which excites us greatly. I've written another book called Running with Roselle. Sorry, we just ran out of copies, and I wasn't able to bring any of them here. It's kind of for kids. But you can go to my website, michaelhingson.com, and learn about it and get a copy if you'd like, or you can go to Amazon and get one. If you go to our website and get it, it comes autographed. But I wrote those books to talk about our story, to talk about our experiences, and try to educate people a little bit. A gentleman named Ron Burns painted a portrait of Roselle, which is available, and 40% of the net proceeds goes to a foundation that we started called Roselle's Dream Foundation to help provide technology to blind kids in schools, because the technology is usually pretty expensive and they don't have other ways to get it easily. So selling the portrait helps. But mostly I travel and speak and try to educate people as we're doing today, trying to get people to understand that we're all part of the same world and that we all need to work together. And that we just need to be open to the fact that some of us may do things in different ways than others. And that's our story. So what I'd like to do, Aaron, how much time do we have?
We have as much time as you like.
Okay, so I've just started the speech. We got another 4 hours. And then I'll open it for questions. No, I'd love to open this for questions. I will tell you that there is no question that is off limits. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you've had, that you might have available, or that you want to ask. So who's got a question? Just shout out.
When did you start using a guide dog?
I was 14 in 1964, do the math, and that's when I got my first guide dog, Squire. I grew up, for my first 5 years, we were in Chicago. My father got a job in Palmdale, California. We moved out there, and I actually never had formal training on traveling as a blind person. I learned it on my own and ended up getting a guide dog at the age of 14. So I've been using guide dogs since. I also do use a cane. The cane is the most basic tool that a blind person has for travel. And I think every blind person should learn to use a cane. You need to learn how to travel, be aware of your surroundings, and be able to move from place to place easily before you can get a guide dog, because you have to be the one to direct the dog.
Michael?
Sir.
I want to commend you for being able to tell the story. Every time you tell a story, you have to relive it. It's got to be tough.
You know, It's ironic. I'll never say this to the National Association of Broadcasters. No, I might. When I started getting interviewed by the press after Larry King Live, we decided to do that because if I could help people move on from 9/11, if I could teach people a little bit more about blindness and guide dogs, then it was worth doing. And I talked to so many people from the media, getting everything from the dumbest questions imaginable to very thought-provoking questions that forced me to think about it. And that's why I'm able to speak about it today, because they and still contact me. And so we're doing interviews, and being able to put all those thoughts into answers to interview questions really helped me more than I can imagine. There are any number of people today who are still paralyzed about this and can't talk about 9/11. And if you don't talk about it, if you don't move on from it, then you're only going to be paralyzed and not able to move forward in your life. And none of us should have to do that. One of the lessons of 9/11 is that change happens. You're not necessarily going to be able to control the change. We had no control over 9/11 happening. I don't believe that we would have been able to predict it. Even if all the agencies in the world were communicating well, things happen. But what I believe is that we absolutely have control over how we deal with the change. And I think that it has to start by talking about it, by talking about your worries, fears, and concerns. Because once you start to do that to a friend or to whatever, then you can start to move on. The question is, what kind of advice to give you about dealing with persons with disabilities and emergencies? The first is, when you encounter people with disabilities, ask them what they need. Don't assume. Asking will probably get you more information than you could get any other way. I think if I were to give you some advice, it would be for a blind person, you don't grab them and pull them around. We're going to use a cane or a dog. I'll take your arm if I need it, or ask you to keep talking as you're directing us somewhere, depending on how much time we have. But I will always function better, not if you take my arm and try to steer me, but if I take your elbow and follow you. But you should always start by asking. And I may not take your elbow, I may use the dog to do that. And I may let the dog take the initiative to follow you, because again, that's what we do best. But most important, ask, because we generally know what we need. And what I might need may be less or more, probably less than what some other people may need who may not travel as well. And the fact is that most all of us know what we need. So the best thing is, don't assume, ask. Yeah, I know you could be in a situation where it's a very serious emergency and there's no time, but still, if you don't ask and you don't take a little bit of time, you may make mistakes that will cost you and us lives because you didn't take the time to do it right. Most of us know what works, and it's all about feeling as comfortable as we can be in a situation. Like the Katrina example that I mentioned, people would leave dogs. They were forced to leave their guide dogs. That shouldn't happen. Or not be able to get a cane. The reality is, I don't function exactly the same way you do, and you need to be sensitive to that. I think that's really the most important set of guidelines that I could give you. Everyone, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for having us.